That sounds really, really loud to me. I don't know about in the back. Is it too loud? Huh? That's just me? Yeah, well, yeah, there's that. Frank, is it loud enough? Too loud? All right. I asked you two things and you said yes. I said, is it loud enough or too loud? And Frank said yes. I don't know, guys. I think it's okay. All right, we'll get started. We will have a few announcements about people who need our prayers. I don't know that we haven't already welcomed Baylor Brooks Murphy to the world, but if we haven't, welcome him, Danny and Cindy's new grandchild, born August 12th at 6:52. Billy Caudle's report last week showed that swelling in her feet and legs was caused by a kidney problem. And Tommy continues to improve. I think he was here last week. Tommy did? Tommy had a bad day yesterday. Okay, well, continue to keep them in our prayers. Judy Cockrell needs our prayers. Hang on, where's the voice coming from? Oh, you can't hear me? Wow. Turn it up, guys. Sounds really loud up here, is that better? Okay. Billy Caudle is not doing well. Tommy Caudle is not doing well. Judy Cockrell needs our prayers. Mike Cockrell, Tommy's nephew, has cancer and not doing well. Dina Cox's dad has a blocked widowmaker artery in his heart and is at St. Thomas West in Nashville. And we'll have surgery Monday, I believe, yes. Jamie Donaldson is recovering from thyroid surgery. Prayers have been requested for Don and Susie Figg. If you've ever been to the Stanton Church, you know Don and Susie. They are longtime members there. Don was my hero for a long time. He was the head of the rescue squad in the Red River Gorge for many years until he retired from the Forestry Service. He is not doing well now, has several serious health problems. He's in Windsor rehab with Parkinson's now. Bonnie Robinson wanted us to continue our prayers for her nephew, Zach Hart. Kim Hester, mother of Jenny Gully, had back surgery Tuesday and is staying with the Gullys still. Well, good deal. Little Ella Howard is waiting on results for her treatment. Arthur Johnson needs our prayers. Carolyn Keith. Of course, Sandy Lansdell, sister of Patty Coons, is in need of our prayers. Joyce and Mike Mathis both. John and Edna Moore both. Ruby and Tommy Oakley are both not, neither of them is doing well. Tommy Cockrell has two sisters, Betty Richardson and Jane McFadden. Both need our prayers. Natalie Sparks will have the rest of her thyroid removed. That's Martha Moore's daughter. The rest of her thyroid removed September 4th. Pauline Sutton, Vernon Tipton, Gerald Vinson, Nancy Welch is recovering from knee replacement surgery, and Marlene Wills has not been doing well for some time. She has pneumonia now and continues to need our prayers. Who else do we need to add to our list? Anybody? Oh, okay. I'm just reading what was written. Jane McLaughlin, not McFadden. Okay. Tommy Cockrell's sister. Correction. All right. What else? Oh, Bree Reffett is sick with pneumonia. Well, what a nice young lady she is. I hate to hear that. I guess if she wasn't a nice young lady, it would still be bad if she had pneumonia. But anyway. Anybody else? Keenan, would you open us with a prayer, please?
Bless this Son that you did this past week. Thank you so much for allowing our elders and those of this congregation to attend PPP and the funds that you make available for that, Father. We thank you for the encouragement that we got there and the lessons that we heard there from the godly men that you've given us, Father. We thank you for men like Jerry willing to teach this class and all the teachers in this congregation that teach and do many works, Father. We thank you for them. Father, many have been mentioned here today, sick and need your healing. Father, we just pray that you will be with them and heal them if it be your will. We pray that you be with their families as well, Father. Father, we thank you for this day. Most importantly, we thank you for Jesus who died on the cross. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
We need to move pretty quickly, but certainly if you have a comment, we will entertain that. But we're going to cover chapters 10 through 12 of Daniel as we close our Daniel class. And it can be done. They are all about the same vision, all three of these chapters. Chapter 10 introduces the vision and continues, and then the vision continues all the way through the end of the book. Chapter 11 gives us the main aspects of the vision, and chapter 12 brings the whole thing to a conclusion. And there are some fascinating things in here about world history. They just down the line, the way things happened after a couple of hundred years, 200 to 400 years after Daniel, he could tell you 200 years ahead of time who the governor was going to be, who the king was going to be, and the kind of person he was going to be. Now, the reason that is so valuable, and I don't know that I've stressed this very well to you in this class, but the reason it was so valuable for the Jews in captivity and near the time of the end of the captivity, for them to know what was coming up in world governments, is because it prepared them and it gave them strength to get through the persecution that Daniel told them was coming. Daniel not only told them when the persecution was coming or that it was coming, he told them usually about how long it would last. And so you're 70 years into persecution by Antiochus Epiphanes. You look at Daniel and you say, hey, it's going to end. It's finally, we're going to work through this. We're going to survive this. And so it would give them strength. And that's what this vision is about. It's a detailed vision about world governments between the time of Daniel, or sometime after the time of Daniel, and the end of the Jewish system in AD 70 when Jerusalem was destroyed. It leads up to that time. I believe the book ends, many people believe it ends in talking about the end of time at the end of the Christian age. I don't believe that. I think the book ends at the end of God's dealing with the Jews as his specific chosen people, which would be about AD 70. And so that's what Daniel was preparing them for, and that's what he was leading up to. Chapter 10 is amazing in and of itself. There are some things in here that we could spend a lot of time but he sets the vision by saying it's in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. A message was revealed to Daniel, whose name is called Belteshazzar. Now this first part sounds like sort of a narrator saying it, because Daniel takes over and they're his words in verse 2. But it's almost like another party is saying the first couple of things. 3rd year of king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. The message was true, but the appointed time was long. And he understood the message and had understanding of the vision. Then Daniel takes over and he says, in those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks, 21 days, that's important. I ate no pleasant food, no meat or wine came into my mouth, nor did I anoint myself till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. Now on the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was beside the great river that is the Tigris, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with the gold of Uphaz, a very bright, expensive gold. His body was like beryl. If I understand it right, beryl changes colors. It can be green or gold or yellow or whatever. In his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like torches, of fire, and his arms and feet like burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision. But a great terror fell on them, so they fled to hide themselves, and I was left alone when I saw this vision, this great vision. No strength remained in me, for my vigor was turned to frailty in me, and I retained no strength. Yet I heard the sound of his words, and while I heard the sound of his words, I was in a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground. So Daniel sees this fascinating spiritual being in verses 5 and 6. And when he sees it, he becomes frail and weak and falls to the ground in a deep sleep with his face down. He falls face down on the ground into a deep sleep, but he can still hear the words. Now, if you figure this up, and I know you have, some of you, but Daniel's nearing 90 years old when this happens. He's at least in his late 80s. He's been there since he was 15. The Jews have actually already been allowed to go back and start rebuilding Jerusalem, but the king of Persia has resisted. He allowed them to go back, and then the people around Jerusalem started opposing them, and so he has stopped work on the temple temporarily. He's told them not to rebuild the temple. And all of that's going on, and Daniel is still over in what used to be Babylon, is now the kingdom of the Persians, the Medes and the Persians. And so he falls down on his face, and he has a conversation with this messenger. And it is, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it because it is a fascinating conversation. This in and of itself is a great study about what goes on the other side of the veil in the spiritual world while you and I are down here messing around on earth. There are things going on the other side, or at least they were, that just absolutely blows your mind. Start with verse 10. Suddenly a hand touched me, with which made me tremble on my knees and on the palms of my hands. And he said, "O Daniel, man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak to you. Stand upright, for I have now been sent to you." And while he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling. So he goes from being face down in a sleep to standing up, but he's shaking all over. He said to me, "Do not fear, for from the first day you set your heart to understand and humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words." So 21 days ago, when Daniel began to fast and to pray, this being heard, this angel or whatever he is, heard Daniel's prayer, but it took him 21 days to get there. Now he's going to tell you why, what he was doing. The prince, the end of verse 12, "I have come because of your words." Verse 13, "But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. Now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come." Did you catch that? This spiritual being heard Daniel's prayer, but he couldn't get away to answer it because for 21 days he was fighting some other spiritual being who was working on behalf of the kings of Persia, who had stopped work on the temple and was opposing the Jews. And he says, for 21 days I've been fighting this spiritual battle on the other side of the veil that you couldn't see. Does that not just blow you away, that all that's going on over there? You think about Michael, and we read about him again in a few minutes, but in Jude, where he had contended for the body of Moses, and in Revelation, you see him fighting, and you see these battles. You remember when Elisha the prophet was overwhelmed by the enemy, and his servant told him, there's no way we can win this war. And so Elisha prayed, and God showed him all those chariots of fire covering the mountains and all that spiritual host out there. You remember Paul in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 10 said, or verse 12, "We do not wrestle with flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places." And all that. There's a battle going on, or has been at least, on the other side of the veil, about which you and I are, except for these few little snippets of information are totally unaware. Now, I don't know if that had the same effect on you as it did me. I have started a whole study about that. I will probably bring some, this in and of itself could be a lesson about how God takes care of us. The messengers of the representatives of the king of Persia, he was the opposition to the Jews. He had stopped work on the temple. He was listening to those who were around and telling him that the Jews weren't doing what they were supposed to, and he was beginning to oppress them again, although he had allowed them to go. And so he had and I don't even know if he knew it, but he had some sort of evil spiritual being working on his behalf, and this being, the one that's talking to Daniel, was in battle with him, working against him, trying to stop him for 21 days. Now, that I could go on and on about that, but just let that sink in your mind and think about it. In verse 15, when he had spoken such words to me, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. Here he goes looking at the ground again. And suddenly, one having the likeness of the sons of men touched my lips, and I opened my mouth and spoke. Look at the last word in verse 15. He became speechless. Then an angelic being like the Son of Man touched his sons of men touched his lips, and he could speak again. My Lord, because of the vision, my sorrows have overwhelmed me, and I have retained no strength. For how can this servant of my Lord talk with you, my Lord? As for me, no strength remains in me, nor is any breath left in me. He's saying, this has overwhelmed me to the point that I don't even think I'm going to be able to carry on this conversation with you. Then again, the one having the likeness of man touched me and strengthened me. There, problem solved. And he said, O man, greatly beloved, fear not. I wonder if an angelic being were to express heaven's opinion of me or you, would he say, O one greatly beloved? There's several places in the book of Daniel we read where this Gabriel in one case came and said, Daniel, you're special up there on the other side. Man, they talk about you. You are beloved on the other side. And Daniel, of course, I guess knew it, but he didn't know that part of it. He knew God loved him. Verse 19, or verse 20, do you know why I have come? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. He had to get away from that battle for a little while to take care of Daniel, and then he's got to go back. This being has to go back to the other side and pick up where he left off, because Michael's there fighting the battle for him right now while he's down talking to Daniel. And when I've gone forth, indeed, the prince of Greece will come. Prince of Greece, Alexander the Great. Persian Empire is the enemy now, then Greece is going to come and take over the whole world. When Alexander the Great is going to be their leader, apparently he has a spiritual being on the other side who will help him take over the world, but not for long. But I will tell you what is noted in Scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these except Michael, your prince. They're not going to win the battle. We're going to be able to do it, and we always will. God will always win. But there's a fight going on. And so I just kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time on chapter 10. I could spend a lot more time on it. But it introduces the vision, and it tells you who brings the vision, and what he looks like, and what he's been doing before he gets there to give you the vision, which is amazing. And what he's going to be doing when he goes back. After he tells Daniel this vision, he's going to go back and fight this battle with a spiritual host of wickedness in a heavenly place who's fighting on behalf of the Persians and then the Greeks. Then what chapter 11 does, chapter 11 tells us about several conflicts that were going on. When Daniel sees this vision, the Persians are the world power. They are the big power. They're the ones who took over, you remember, from the Babylonians many years before this. And so chapter 11 talks about 4 kings who are going to come, including Cyrus, who is the king, or Darius, who is the king now. And it will include he and 3 others. And the fourth one will be richer than all the others, verse 2. The fourth shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. That's Xerxes, or what's he called in Esther, Ahasuerus or something like that, but his name is known as Xerxes, and he is the one to whom Esther was married, and he was a very wealthy and very powerful king. And so this is sometime in the future, but he says they're going to be after this king, there are going to be 3 more kings, and the last one's going to be richer than all the rest of them, and he is going to have to contend with Greece. And when the Greeks come in, chapter 11 and verse 2, I tell you the truth, behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. But then, verse 3, and it's amazing how many hundreds of years of history they cover in one verse. The brevity of the Bible always amazes me. A mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. That's Alexander the Great. He's going to come in, and the Grecian Empire is going to cover the entire world, a known world, or much of it. And but about the time he was reigning high, he died when he was 33 years old, and 4 of his generals took over. You remember us talking about that in another vision. And so, verse 4, when he has arisen, when he's gotten to where he wanted to be, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. And that would be his 4 generals who took over: Seleucus, Cassander, Lysimachus, and Ptolemy the First, who ruled over Egypt. They each had a different section. One had Syria, one had Greece, one had Thracia, an area between Greece and Turkey, and another had Egypt. And Alexander had all that, but when he died, it was split up among his 4 generals. And just in this brief verse, this being tells Daniel that's exactly what's going to happen. Then, in verse 5, he talks about the king of the south arising. And that is, the Egyptians came in to take over the Syrians. Now, here's a problem. What lies between Egypt in the south and Syria in the north? Using your Bible geography knowledge. Huh? Yeah, Jerusalem, the land of Egypt, the Palestinian area along the coast of the Mediterranean. And so guess who's caught in the middle of the war between the Egyptians and the Syrians? The Jews. And here it comes again. Another persecution, another difficulty for them. But then Antiochus Epiphanes is going to come, and he is unlike any we've ever seen. Notice what verse 21 of chapter 11 says about him. In his place, chapter 21 of, or verse 21 of chapter 11. My mouth talks before my brain works sometimes. Chapter 11, verse 21. In his place shall arise a vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he comes peaceably. He actually didn't take his kingdoms. Antiochus Epiphanes didn't take his kingdoms by military force. He was cunning and crooked and crafty and deceiving, and he would make treaties and then back out on them and do things like that. And so it was a peaceable takeover, a peaceful takeover. And he would come, but he's just so sorry. I mean, they all are, but this guy, people didn't like him. They didn't, and he was vile. And when he wasn't able to rule Egypt completely, and he wasn't completely able to reconcile Egypt and Syria, he got mad and landed in between with the Jews and started doing things like outlawing temple worship and putting swine on the altar, which is the epitome of an unclean animal for the Jews. and persecuting the Jews and doing all of those things. Is there any wonder that this angel from heaven told Daniel that nobody's going to respect this guy? Nobody from the sense of what? The Jews, God's chosen people. This is going to be a horrible enemy, and he was. He was the one who triggered the Maccabean rebellion, if you remember, and that's during the time between the Testaments, between Malachi and Matthew, that went on, and we don't have a lot of record of that, but we do have secular history about it. But anyway, verses 20 through 35, and you can read that on your sometime on your own, and just read what a horrible person he was. And then a blasphemous king will arise. Verse 36, the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall neither regard God, the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he will exalt himself above them all. There are 4 schools of thought about who this is in verse 36. There are those who believe that he's still talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. And then there are others, the 2 schools that you and I will entertain and think about. The other is there are those who believe this is the Roman Empire. That the Roman Empire would, of course they did. The emperors required emperor worship. They called themselves gods, and would persecute or kill anybody who didn't bow down to them. That was the big problem the Christians had when they first started in the Roman Empire. 2 scholars whom I respect greatly, Jim McGuigan and Mark Copeland, those 2 take opposite positions. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Mark thinks that it's the Roman Empire, and Jim McGuigan in his great commentary, and I recommend you find Jim McGuigan's commentary on Daniel and look at that. But McGuigan says it's a continuation of Antiochus Epiphanes. Either way, he's telling them there's going to be this wicked king, and he doesn't care if you worship the way you're supposed to or not. And he's going to make it very difficult for you to do so. In verse 45, he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. All of these wicked rulers, all of these wicked things on earth. I was at a funeral yesterday for my cousin, Billy Joyce Conkrite Barber. Some of you knew her, over in Owensville. And the preacher mentioned something that I thought was fairly profound. He said the one thing about life is it's tough and it's not fair, but it's not permanent. There's 3 things. And he said the 3 things about life. It's tough. It's not a bed of roses for anybody. You look out here and I see people that I think have perfect lives. I guarantee you got something going on. I guarantee it. And if not, you will have. And that's life on earth. And you think about a young lady in her 30s, newly married, getting ready to start a family, and all of a sudden her husband's stricken with a disease that leaves him totally paralyzed, and she becomes a caretaker for the rest of her life. That's not fair. That's not fair. But life's not fair. But the great thing about life is, and that's exactly what this says, the great thing about life is it's not permanent. It gets better. And so that's how Daniel ends this thing. In verse 45, he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. Whether it's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes or the Roman Empire, either one, the end came for him, and nobody cared if it ended or not. And so you have his conquest. Now I know that is a 5th gear moving on through chapter 11, but you get the idea. Daniel was given, because he was beloved, this vision of world history years, hundreds of years before it happened, and it happened exactly like that. Now guess what the liberal scholars say about it? After the fact. They say, yeah, You talk about what a great prophet Daniel was. He wasn't all that great because this was written far later than you think it was. It was written after the fact, and he went back and pretended that he knew these things. Well, that's ridiculous. This book is exactly what it says it is. It was written when it claims to have been written, and it was prophecy. The whole book is about prophecy, inspired of God. And so that would be the easy explanation, that he went back and wrote it after it happened. But the amazing thing is he wrote it 200 to 400 years before it happened. Just like Isaiah did with the birth of Christ in chapter 7 and verse 14, 750 years before it happened. Isaiah 53 told about his crucifixion in great detail. Psalm 22 told about his crucifixion in detail. And years before it happened. That's one of the solidifying evidences of the inspiration of the Bible for me. Is it for you? That they could tell events hundreds of years before they happened, and then you read about that event in the New Testament, and it's exactly like the prophet said it was going to happen. And so you know it came from God. Chapter 12 starts giving us a glimmer of hope. The ultimate victory of God's people. In chapter 12, at that time, Michael, there's our angel, he's called an archangel, he's called the one who fights for God's people, and he will arise, stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as there never was before, since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people will be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. And so there's hope. Now, is he talking about the end of time, the final resurrection? Maybe. Is he talking about the end of God's dealing with the Jewish people and how some are going to be delivered and others are going to perish because they didn't believe? Maybe. We don't know, but either way it gives us hope, doesn't it? If it is talking about the end of time, Daniel knew that there was going to be a time when we had all of this hope. And then the final thing that Daniel is told to do in this book is to seal it up. Shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. People are going to learn these things. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on this riverbank and the other on that riverbank. And one said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the rivers, How long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? Then I heard the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever and ever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. Time, and half a times, 3.5 years, is often used as an indefinite period of time or a complete period of time. It's going to be when it's going to be complete. In other words, I'm not going to answer your question. I'm not going to tell you the exact time it's going to be, but it is going to be. When the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. That's why it leads me to believe that he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. The power of the holy people will be shattered. Although I heard, I did not understand. So Daniel asked a question. My Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white, and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Now, what's he talking about? The wicked people didn't know that they were talked about 200 to 400 years before time, but the wise people, when the persecution and the wicked king came along, the wise people knew that this is exactly what Daniel was talking about. Hey, I read in a book one time about you. It was written 200 years ago. About me? They didn't know. But the wise people the godly people know. And from that time, verse 11, chapter 12, that the daily sacrifice is taken away, end of the Jewish system. The abomination of desolation is set up. Jesus said in Matthew 24, that was when the Roman army came upon the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, when Titus came to destroy. Jesus said that is what Daniel was talking about. Jesus said that by inspiration, that were speaking God's words as God in the flesh. There shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. But you, now here's the final word to Daniel, you go your way till the end, for you shall rest, and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. Daniel, all this stuff that you talked about, it's going to happen. But you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Do we have promises like that in the New Testament for Christians? Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. I'll never leave you or forsake you, so you may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What can man do to me? I will not leave you or forsake you. Those are the same kinds of promises. When we leave this earth, are there still going to be horrible things that hurt innocent people going on? Yeah. But the faithful are finally going to get to see the peace and the end and the no tears and all those things. All the unfair stuff and all the hard stuff, it's all gone. And Daniel lived through a lot, didn't he? He stayed faithful and God took care of him. You may say, like they said about Job, well, God built a hedge around him. No, he had it pretty tough in some of those situations. But he lived perhaps into his 90s. We know in his, almost for certain, in his late 80s at least. And there is a place in what used to be Babylon that they claim to be Daniel's tomb. You can see it now if you were brave enough to go over there on a trip. There's such a place that they claim that Daniel died there in Babylonian it wasn't Babylon by then. It had been a whole bunch of other things, but that he passed away. So what I want to spend the rest of the class talking about are lessons that we've learned from this whole book of Daniel. Lessons to remember, because we're closing out the book. We've talked about it for, this is our 12th lesson, and we have learned some interesting things, and so very quickly we'll just kind of go over some lessons. If you will tolerate me doing that for the next few minutes. One of the things I learned from Daniel is when men disobey, God disciplines. And sometimes it's severe. God is capable of severe discipline. Hebrews chapter 12 says, no discipline is pleasant as you're going through it, but it makes you better. And it will either make you better or you'll die in a sinful condition and be lost. And so God punished Israel. That's what the whole book of Daniel's about, isn't it? They were unfaithful and they were warned by one minor prophet after another. And finally God said, I'm going to have you taken into captivity for 70 years. And they kept just going on like they were, and he did. He did exactly what he said. Another thing I learned from Daniel is God can solve every problem that you face. God can solve every problem. You think being thrown into a den of lions is a problem? Yeah, pretty serious problem. You probably lost a couple nights of sleep trying to figure out how to fix it. Yeah, God took care of it. What was the solution? Just shut the mouths of the lions. I just won't let the lions bite you. I'll fix it. Being thrown into a fiery furnace that was so hot that the people that threw you in died. Oh, we got a problem. God took care of it. God fixed it. They weren't even singed. Their clothes didn't even smell like smoke. And God completely fixed it. And so he can solve every problem. God rules in the kingdoms of men. How else could he have told and foretold all those kingdoms and controlled all of that He told Nebuchadnezzar, remember, because you've humbled yourself, after crawling around eating grass and all that, after you've humbled yourself, he said, you'll die peacefully. But everybody after you may not, but you will. And so it wasn't until after him, a couple of leaders down from him, Belshazzar was the wicked leader who was overtaken. But during Nebuchadnezzar's last days, apparently it was peaceful. God controls all that. I love Isaiah's assessment of it when he talks about nations are like dust on a scale and God can just blow them off and put somebody else on it. If you're like me, when you stand on a scale, you want all obstructions gone. You don't want, you want to take off your shoes, take your change out of your pockets and make sure the scale's good and clean and make sure that number's just as low as you could possibly get it. Dust is pretty insignificant. And God says through Isaiah the prophet, the United States of America is like dust. I could blow it off and put somebody else in your place. He doesn't say it exactly like that, but that's what it means. God can use a bad man to accomplish a good thing, to accomplish His will. They didn't come any worse than Nebuchadnezzar in the beginning. He was ruthless. And Nabopolassar, his father, was even worse, who was instrumental in the first carrying away of the Jews. And so God could use evil men to accomplish His will. Conviction is the solution to moral challenges. Daniel said, I'm not going to compromise. I'm just not. What if? I'm not going to compromise. What if I'm not going to compromise. Not going to change. Why, you hard-headed religious fanatic? I'm not going to change. Just that simple. If you're convicted that something's the truth. You know my little mantra that I've lived by for 50 years, be right, be nice, be fearless and firm. Make sure you're right, and you don't have to be ugly about it, but if you're convicted, don't let them move you. Godly men will die rather than compromise, and that's a fact. Death is not that big scary thing for us. I'm a little bit nervous about the actual process because I don't understand it completely, but what's on the other side, I'm not a bit nervous about that because I know what He has promised. God controls governments, creatures, and elements. How do you know that? Well, governments, we've just seen a vision that God knows exactly what's going to happen. He knows when those wicked kings are going to end and who's going to take over and all that. What about creatures? Lions and whales, or sea creatures, sea monsters, whatever you want to call that thing. Elements. Was it Jesus who stood up and said to the wind and wave, behave yourself? And they stopped. He controls all that. And we learned that from the book of Daniel and other books. The most powerful governments can fall quickly. We talked a little bit about that. The kingdom of Christ is everlasting and indestructible. It is a spiritual kingdom. They're not going to be able to blow it off the scales and replace it with anything because it is of God. Another lesson we want to remember is the power of prayer. Remember, Daniel prayed morning, noon, and night. And he fasted and prayed. In this last vision we saw in chapter 10, he was fasting and praying for 21 days. God heard him, took care of him, and answered him. God, and this is fascinating to me, and don't worry, I'm not going to go off and preach every lesson about angels for the next 6 months or anything like that. But I am going to study it in depth more so because it's obvious that He uses and has used these spiritual beings to accomplish His will, and that there's a battle going on the other side always, it appears to be. You can be godly even in a high position. Daniel rose to the top of the king's wise men. Joseph was second ruler in all of Egypt. Is that the second time they've done that? Or the first time? First time. Yeah, okay. So it doesn't matter what your position is in life, you can still be godly. God knows the future and He knows the present. If we learn anything from Daniel, it's that. Daniel was a courageous youth, wasn't he? About 15, and we learn a lot from his faith. and he was faithful in his old age. And so it doesn't matter where you are in life, there's a place in God's kingdom for you to serve faithfully. Great, wise men are also humble. Do you ever get the idea from studying the book of Daniel that he was arrogant and overbearing and egotistical? You ever get that idea? No. Just a humble servant. But you're the wisest of the wise men. Still just a servant. Still just a servant. Our enemies will recognize our faith. It happened over and over again for Daniel. If you learn that from the book of Daniel, the enemies are going to see it and say, wow, he has something different than the rest of us. The righteous shall shine as stars forever, eventually. I've enjoyed teaching you the book of Daniel. I'm going to turn around and starting September 5th, teach it for 8 Thursday nights in a row, 3 hours each Thursday night at Bluegrass Bible Institute in Dry Ridge, Kentucky, starting at 6 on Thursday night and going till 9 for 8 Thursday nights in a row. If you want to drive the hour and a half up to Dry Ridge and get another deeper dose of Daniel, you're welcome to do that. And if you want to take a college class on the book of Daniel after having sat through this one, that's what we're going to do. Thank you for your good attention.